Hashtag the Black Ship, side story What's the mission? The conference room on Deck 4 was cold. It was always cold. The air recyclers on the UEN Steadfast had a habit of running just a little too hard on the lower decks, and nobody had ever bothered to fix it. The 6 people sitting around the long metal table had learned to live with it. They had learned to live with a lot of things. Lieutenant Commander Karl Novak walked in last. He did not say good morning. He did not smile. He set a data tablet down on the table, pulled out his chair, and sat down without any of the small talk that people use to make a room feel comfortable. The room was not meant to be comfortable today. He looked at the 5 faces across from him. Sergeant Dana Holloway sat closest to the door. She was lean and sharp-eyed, with short brown hair and the kind of stillness that came from years of knowing when to move and when to wait. She had worked with Novak long enough to read his moods from the way he walked into a room. Today's mood was serious. More serious than usual. Next to her was Corporal Ethan Cruz. He was younger than the rest of them, mid-20s, with an alert face and a stylus tucked behind his ear that he probably didn't even know was there. He leaned forward slightly in his seat, like he was already ready to take notes on something. Specialist Roy Gaines sat across from Dana. He was a big man, wide in the shoulders, with large hands that he rested flat on the table. He did not fidget. He did not look around. He simply waited, which was one of the things he was best at. Petty Officer First Class Leonard Tate was at the far left, arms folded, eyes low. He had a face that was hard to read on a good day, and today he was not trying to make it easier. At the end of the table, slightly apart from the others, sat Dr. Nora Ellison. She was the only one in the room who was not military. She was a xenolinguist, a scientist who studied alien languages, on loan from the Department of Contact Studies. She had a quiet way of observing things, people, rooms, silences, that made some people nervous. She was watching Novak now with calm, careful eyes. Novak looked at all of them for a moment. Then he tapped the center of the table and the holographic projector came on. What appeared above the table was not a map or a route. It was a shape. Large, angular, and completely black. Not the dark gray of deep space rock. Not the shadow blue of a ship running dark. Black in a way that felt wrong, like looking at a hole in the air where something should have been. Nobody spoke. 11 days ago, Novak said, the crew of a civilian mining freighter called the Cassidy was traveling through the Kepler 7 transit corridor. Routine run. Nothing unusual on their logs up to that point. He paused. Then they sent a single transmission. This image. And then they went silent. He let that sit for a second. We have not heard from the Cassidy since. We do not know where the crew is. We do not know what happened to the ship. Dana leaned forward just slightly. And the object? 4 kilometers long, Novak said. It matches nothing in the UEN database. Nothing in the Coalition registry. Nothing in any catalog of known alien vessels that we have access to. He looked at the shape above the table. And 48 hours ago, it started moving. Ethan stopped writing. Moving where? Novak looked at him. Toward the Alderman colony. 32,000 people. The room went very quiet. Outside the small viewport near the ceiling, the stars sat still and cold and far away. Roy Gaines broke the silence first. His voice was low and even. What's the speed? Slow, Novak said. At its current rate, it reaches the outer edge of the Alderman system in about 19 days. We reach it in 19 hours. Leonard Tate finally looked up. What are our orders exactly? Novak picked up the data tablet and set it back down. 3 things. First, we attempt contact. Dr. Ellison leads that part of the mission. Second, we assess the level of threat and report back to UEN Command with everything we observe. Third, he stopped for just a moment, if we determine that the vessel is an immediate danger to the colony, we are authorized to respond. Dana did not look away from him. Respond. Yes. With what, exactly? If that thing is 4 kilometers long and we can't even pick up a heat signature on it. We are a reconnaissance vessel, Novak said. Our weapons are light. I know that. Command knows that. The point is not to destroy it. The point is to understand it, and to buy time if understanding is not possible. Nora had not said anything yet. She was still looking at the projected shape, her head slightly tilted, like she was listening for something. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but direct. I want to say clearly that approaching an unknown vessel with the assumption of threat is a mistake. Not just ethically. Tactically. She looked at Novak. If that ship is as advanced as its size and its lack of emissions suggest, then anything we could do to it offensively would be meaningless. Worse than meaningless. It could be interpreted as an attack. Novak held her gaze. I agree with you. She blinked. That surprised her. Which is why you are here, he said. The goal is communication first. Everything else is a last option. He stood up, which in a small room like this felt like a signal that the formal part of the briefing was ending. We have 19 hours. Use them. Review every piece of data in the mission file. Get rest if you can. Ask questions if you have them, because once we are in that corridor, things will move fast and I need everyone sharp. Nobody moved right away. They sat with the shape above the table, that lightless, enormous thing that had appeared out of nowhere and swallowed a ship whole and was now moving, slowly and steadily, toward 32,000 people who had no idea it existed. Ethan stared at it. Do we know how long it's been out there? No, Novak said. Do we know where it came from? No. Do we know if there's anyone on it? Novak reached over and clicked off the projector. The shape disappeared. The room felt a little larger without it, but not much. That, he said, is what we're going to find out. He picked up his tablet and walked to the door. He stopped there for a second without turning around. Get some sleep if you can. Whatever is waiting for us out there has been waiting a long time. It can wait 19 more hours. Then he left. The five of them sat there in the cold air for a moment. Roy looked at the empty space where the image had been. Leonard unfolded his arms. Ethan tapped his stylus against the table once, slowly, and then stopped. Dana was the first one to stand. She pushed her chair back, looked at the empty projector, and then looked at the viewport and the stars beyond it. She had been on difficult missions before. Frontier Patrol. 2 border incidents. A rescue operation that had taken 11 days and ended badly. She was not easily shaken. But that shape, that absolute, light-eating black, sat in the back of her mind the way a sound sits in a quiet room after it has already stopped. Present without being there. Wrong without being explainable. She went back to her bunk. She lay down in the dark and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. #the black ship, side story. What's the mission? The ship was quiet at night. Not completely quiet, there was always the low hum of the engines, the soft sound of the air recyclers, the occasional click of a system running its automatic checks, but there was a kind of stillness that settled over the steadfast in the hours between shifts that felt different from the noise of the day. Calmer. More honest somehow, like the ship itself was thinking. Dr. Nora Ellison was not sleeping. She was sitting at the small desk in her cabin with 4 screens open and a paper notebook in her lap, which was unusual enough on a spacecraft that Roy Gaines had actually commented on it when he first saw her with it. She liked paper. She thought differently when she could write by hand. Her handwriting was small and slightly tilted, and the notebook was already half full of notes from the past 6 hours. She had read the entire mission file twice. Then she had gone back through her own research archives, pulling files she hadn't opened in months. She was looking for something, though she could not have said exactly what. A feeling, more than a specific piece of data. The feeling that she had seen something like this before, or almost seen it, or heard it described in a way she hadn't understood at the time. The transmission from the Cassidy was just an image. No audio. No additional data beyond the basic timestamp and origin point. The ship's automated systems had sent it as part of a standard observation log, which meant the crew had taken the picture and logged it in the system without yet knowing what they were looking at. After that, nothing. The log simply ended. Nora stared at the image of the black shape on one of her screens. She had been staring at it, off and on, for most of the evening. There was something about its geometry that bothered her. Not in a frightening way. In the way a word sometimes sits at the edge of your mind and won't come forward, like it's waiting for the right moment. She wrote 3 words in her notebook: structure, intent, age. Those were the questions. Not what is it, because that was too large a question to begin with. But what kind of structure was it? How was it shaped? How was it put together? What did those choices say about what made it? And what was its intent? What was it doing? Where was it going? Why? And how old was it? Because something that size, with no heat signature and no emissions, had not been made by a young civilization. Whatever had built that ship had been building things for a very long time. She underlined the word age and then turned to a different screen. In the data bay 2 decks below, Corporal Ethan Cruz had been doing something similar, though with considerably more screens and considerably less paper. He had requested access to the deep archive, the old UEN records that predated the current database structure, the files that had been digitized from physical storage and uploaded but never properly organized or indexed. Most of it was boring. Equipment reports. Route logs. Supply manifests. The digital equivalent of a storage unit full of boxes that nobody had opened in 20 years. But Ethan was patient, and he was good at finding things that other people had stopped looking for. He was running a search across all anomalous contact reports from the past 60 years, any record of an object that did not match known vessel classifications, any contact log flagged as unusual and then unresolved. Most of them turned out to be nothing. A few were interesting but unrelated. And then, about 2 hours in, he found 2 things that were not nothing. The first was a patrol report from 22 years ago. A UEN vessel in the outer helix sector had logged a contact, large, dark, no emissions, no response to hails, before being rerouted to handle a border incident. The contact had never been followed up on. The report had been filed correctly, logged in the system, and then simply never opened again. Not classified. Not hidden. Just forgotten, the way things get forgotten when there is always something more urgent demanding attention. Ethan copied the file and flagged it. The second thing was stranger. It was a fragment of a signal, not an image, not a visual contact, but an actual transmission, logged by a deep space relay station 9 years ago. The station's automated systems had received it, flagged it as non-standard, and passed it up the chain. Someone up the chain had looked at it, attached a note that read probable equipment artifact, and closed the file. Ethan looked at the waveform of the signal for a long time. It was not random noise. Random noise did not have rhythm. Random noise did not have the kind of internal repetition that this signal had, the way certain sequences appeared at regular intervals like something being emphasized. Ethan was not a linguist and he knew it. He understood enough to know that this was beyond him, but he also understood enough to know that this mattered. He looked at the time. It was past 2 in the morning, ship standard. He went upstairs and knocked on Dr. Ellison's door. She answered in about 12 seconds, fully dressed, notebook in one hand, tablet in the other. She looked at him and then at the tablet he was holding up toward her, and she stepped aside without a word to let him in. He explained what he had found. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Ethan appreciated about her. She let people finish. When he was done, she took his tablet and looked at the waveform of the old signal. Her expression did not change much, but her eyes moved differently. Faster. More alert. 9 years ago, she said quietly. Logged and closed. Nobody followed up. She sat down on the edge of her desk chair and looked at the waveform again. Then she opened her own archive and pulled up a particular research paper she had written 4 years earlier, a theoretical framework for first contact language structure, which she had published in a journal that maybe 300 people in the world read. She placed the 2 documents side by side on the screen. I built this framework based on mathematical first principles, she said. The idea that any sufficiently advanced intelligence, regardless of biology or origin, would use certain structures to make itself understood to an unknown receiver. Repetition for emphasis. Pattern for meaning. Variation for complexity. She pointed at the waveform. This signal uses all 3. Ethan looked at it. So it's not equipment noise. It is absolutely not equipment noise. She was already moving, pulling up additional tools, cross-referencing the waveform against frequency databases and pattern libraries. Ethan, this signal is 9 years old, and the relay station it passed through is in the outer edge of the Kepler transit zone. He understood immediately. Same region. Same region. She looked at him. It was already there 9 years ago. It was already trying to say something. And nobody was listening. They worked through the rest of the night together. Nora did not try to fully translate the signal. She was honest with herself about the fact that what they had was too small a fragment to translate with any real confidence. But she could analyze its structure. She could identify the parts that repeated and the parts that varied. She could build a rough map of its architecture, the way you can describe the shape of a building even in the dark if you walk its walls carefully enough. By the time the Steadfast's internal lighting shifted from its night cycle blue to its morning cycle white, they had something. Not a translation. Not even close. But a shape. A structure. Evidence that the signal had been built with intent, that something had sat down, or the equivalent of sitting down, and thought about how to be understood. Nora went straight to Novak's office. He was already awake, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had also not slept much. She put both tablets on his desk without greeting him. It spoke, she said. Or it tried to. 9 years ago, before the Cassidy, before any of this, it sent a signal, and nobody recognized it for what it was. Novak looked at the tablets. He picked up Ethan's first, then hers. He read carefully, which Nora appreciated. He did not skim. When he put them down, his expression had shifted in a way she couldn't fully name. Not quite worry. Not quite relief. Something between the two. So it's been trying to talk to us, he said. I think so. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the small porthole behind his desk, the stars moved slowly as the ship turned on its heading. Then we need to be ready to answer, he said. Whatever it has to say, we need to be ready to hear it. Nora nodded and picked up her tablets. At the door she stopped for just a second. Commander, she said. Whatever is on that ship, it waited 9 years without getting a response. And it's still trying. She paused. That tells us something important. Novak looked at her. What does it tell us? That it's patient, she said. More patient than we are. And that it hasn't given up. She left. Novak sat back and looked at the stars. 19 hours had become 3, #the black ship, side story what's the mission? The Steadfast dropped out of transit speed at 0614 hours, ship standard time. There was a low shudder through the hull as the drive system shifted, the kind of vibration that every experienced spacefarer learned to identify without thinking about it, the way a person learns to recognize the sound of their own front door. The stars on the forward display went from the stretched, blurred lines of transit to sharp and still points of light. The Kepler 7 corridor opened up ahead of them, a wide stretch of deep space between two star systems, used mostly by freight haulers and fuel transports because it cut several days off the longer safe routes. It looked empty. For about 4 seconds, it looked completely empty. Then Leonard Tate said, "Contact," in the flat tone of a man reporting a weather reading, and every head on the bridge turned toward his screen. The black ship was there. At 800 kilometers it was still just a shape on the display, a solid return on the radar that should not have been solid, given that every other sensor they had was reporting almost nothing. No heat. No radiation. No electromagnetic emissions. The radar painted it because radar worked on reflection, and the ship reflected, but every other system that should have told them something about what they were looking at simply returned silence. It was like scanning a mountain and being told by your instruments that the mountain did not exist. Commander Novak stood at the center of the bridge and looked at the forward viewport. You could not see it yet with the naked eye at this distance. That would change. All stop, he said. Hold us here. The Steadfast eased to a halt. Around Novak, the bridge crew worked quietly, adjusting sensors, running diagnostics, logging their position and the contact data in real time. These were trained people doing their jobs, and they did them without being told. Novak appreciated that. He had served on ships where the crew needed direction for every small step, and he had learned through long experience that those ships moved slowly when it mattered most. Dana was at the tactical console, running passive scans with the thoroughness of someone who did not trust the initial results. She ran the scan 3 times. The results were the same each time. The object was approximately 4 kilometers in length, wider in the middle than at the ends, with a surface that absorbed almost all incoming sensor energy except basic radar. The temperature of its outer hull matched the ambient temperature of deep space, which meant either it had no internal heat source, or whatever insulation it used was so effective that not a single degree leaked out. "It's been out here a while," she said quietly, not to anyone in particular. Roy Gaines had come up from his station below decks and was standing near the back of the bridge. He was not supposed to be there exactly, but nobody asked him to leave. He was looking at the radar return on the nearest screen with the expression of a man trying to figure out if he recognized something. 4 kilometers, he said. "That's bigger than any station we've ever built." "Bigger than most moons we've landed on," Leonard said, without looking up from his panel. Ethan Cruz was at the secondary communications console, and Dr. Nora Ellison was next to him, already working. She had been working since before the ship dropped out of transit. She had used the final 3 hours of travel to prepare 5 different transmission packages, each one built on different assumptions about the nature of the receiver. She had worked methodically, starting from the most basic possible foundation, pure mathematics, sequences that any mind capable of building a spacecraft would recognize, and moving toward increasingly complex structures. The last package, the 5th one, was built from the 9-year-old signal that Ethan had found in the archive. She had spent the most time on that one. She had taken the original waveform apart piece by piece, analyzed its rhythm and structure, and then rebuilt it, not as a copy, but as a response. A reflection. Something that said, in the clearest way she could manage across an enormous gap of understanding, "We heard you. We recognize your voice. Here is ours." She was not sure it would work. She was not sure anything would work. But she believed in trying the thing that made the most sense before moving on to the things that made less sense, and responding to a voice in the language it had already used made the most sense to her. "Commander," she said. "I'm ready when you are." Novak looked at the viewport. The object was visible now, just barely, at this distance, but visible. A darkness against the darkness. The stars behind it were simply not there. "Proceed," he said. Nora transmitted the first package. They waited. The bridge was so quiet that Ethan could hear the faint sound of his own heartbeat. 4 minutes passed. Nothing. She transmitted the second package. More silence. 3 minutes. 4. Leonard shifted his position at his console but said nothing. Dana kept her eyes on her screen. Roy had his arms crossed and was looking at the floor, which was what he did when he was thinking. Third package. Mathematical progression layered over a geometric framework, 2 structures that should have been readable by almost any intelligence that had developed enough mathematics to build a ship. Still nothing. "It's possible it doesn't register us as significant," Nora said. Not discouraged, just thinking out loud. "Something that large, with that kind of technology, we might be too small to notice. Like trying to get the attention of someone across a very large room by whispering." "Are you saying we should be louder?" Ethan asked. "I'm saying we should be more recognizable." She was already reaching for the 5th package. "The first 4 are things I designed. This one," she tapped the file, "is something it designed. Or something close to it. If it remembers sending it, it might recognize it coming back." She transmitted the 5th package. For the first 11 seconds, nothing happened. Novak counted them. He did not mean to, but he counted them anyway, the way you count seconds between lightning and thunder to judge how far away a storm is. And then every screen on the bridge went white. Not in the way a power surge whitens screens, not a flash and then darkness. The screens simply filled. All of them. Every display on the bridge, from the main forward screen to the smallest secondary readout beside Leonard's elbow, flooded simultaneously with dense, structured signal data. It poured in across every receiving channel the Steadfast had, and several it didn't officially have, as if the ship had opened frequencies it hadn't known existed until they were already in use. Dana pulled up the tactical overview out of reflex and then stopped, because there was nothing tactical to read. The ship had not moved. No weapons systems had activated, at least none that any of their instruments could detect. It was simply data. Enormous amounts of it, coming in fast and organized, like a library door opening. Ethan let out a breath that was close to a laugh. Not from humor, from the release of something that had been held tight for a long time. It heard us, he said. It was already listening, Nora said. Her hands were moving fast across the console, capturing the incoming data, routing it into analysis buffers, flagging segments for review. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes were bright in a way that Ethan had not seen in the hours they had worked together. It heard the original signal reflected back and it recognized it. And now it's, she paused, reading something on her screen, now it's answering. Properly. At full volume. Can you read it? Novak asked. Not yet. Not even close. This is going to take time. She did not stop working while she spoke. But Commander, the structure of this response is not aggressive. I know that's a subjective read at this stage, but the way it's organized, the pacing of it, this is not a warning. It's not a weapon. It's something closer to a, she searched for the right word, an explanation. Novak stood very still in the center of his bridge and looked at the screens full of light. In the viewport behind all of them, the black ship floated without moving, enormous and patient and silent to every instrument except the ones now overflowing with its voice. The Steadfast was a small ship. 41 crew, light arms, built for speed and observation. In every practical and physical sense, it was nothing compared to the thing sitting 800 kilometers off its bow. But it had done what no one else had managed to do in 9 years of accidental proximity and missed chances. It had said hello in a language that was understood. And the answer had come, #the black ship, side story what's the mission? The data kept coming for 6 minutes straight before it tapered off and stabilized into a slow, steady stream. 6 minutes does not sound like a long time. But 6 minutes of dense, structured, layered signal data, coming in across every channel simultaneously, was enough to fill every available buffer on the Steadfast and force Leonard Tate to reroute 3 secondary systems just to keep the ship from running out of storage space to put it all. I need more room, Leonard said to no one in particular. Take whatever you need, Novak told him. Nora had not moved from her console. She had not looked away from her screens. In the 2 hours that followed the initial transmission, she worked with the focused, quiet intensity of someone who understood that they were holding something fragile and important and could not afford to drop it. Ethan stayed beside her, doing what she asked, pulling comparison files, running pattern analyses, flagging sections of the incoming data that repeated or referenced each other, without asking unnecessary questions. He had learned in the past 12 hours that she thought better without interruption, and he was good at working in silence when the situation called for it. The rest of the bridge ran on a kind of careful, sustained tension. People did their jobs. Nobody left their station. The Steadfast stayed at 800 kilometers and held its position, small and still against the vast darkness, and the black ship floated ahead of it, enormous and unchanged, as if it had all the time in the universe and probably did. Roy had eventually gone back to his post below decks, but he came up twice to check on things without being asked and both times left quietly when he saw that nobody needed anything from him. Dana ran continuous passive scans, documenting every reading, or every absence of a reading, in careful detail. She was building a physical profile of the vessel one data point at a time, and even though most of those data points were zeros, the shape of the zeros was starting to tell her something. It's not powered down, she said at one point, about an hour in. Novak looked at her. Explain. A ship that's powered down goes cold over time. This thing has had no heat signature for at least 9 years, probably longer. But the surface temperature matches ambient space almost exactly, not approximately, almost exactly. That kind of thermal regulation doesn't happen passively. Something is actively managing it. She looked at the readouts. It's running. It's just running very quietly. Like it's trying not to be noticed. Ethan asked from across the bridge. Dana considered that. Or like it was designed to operate in a way that doesn't interfere with the environments it passes through. She paused. That's actually a more careful way to travel than anything we've built. Novak filed that away and went back to watching Nora work. At the 2-hour mark, Nora sat back from her console for the first time. She looked at her screens, then at her notebook. She had been writing in it intermittently, small notes and diagrams, and then at the empty cup of coffee that someone had brought her an hour ago that she had not touched. All right, she said. I want to tell you what I think I'm reading, and I want to be very clear that this is early and partial and I could be wrong about significant parts of it. Understood, Novak said. Go ahead. The bridge crew were all listening, even the ones who did not turn around from their stations. The signal has a layered structure, Nora said. The outer layer, the part that came first and is easiest to read, is mathematical and geometric. Basic relationships. Almost like an introduction or a proof of intelligence. It's saying, in effect, I am organized. I am not random. She turned a page in her notebook. The second layer is harder. It's referential, it's pointing at things. I think it's describing itself. Not the ship specifically, but the origin of the ship. The ones who made it. What does it say about them? Dana asked. That they were old. Significantly older than us. I can't give you a number, but the way certain elements of the transmission are structured, the scale references, the time markers, suggests a civilization that existed and developed over a very long period. Much longer than human history. She said it plainly, not dramatically. The third layer is the one I'm still working on. It's the deepest and the most complex. But I believe it's directional. It's pointing at something. Not a location exactly, or not only a location. More like a concept. A category of thing. She looked at Novak. I think it's trying to tell us what it's carrying. The bridge was very quiet. Carrying, Novak said. Yes. I think there is something inside that ship. Not a crew, I don't believe there is a living crew. But something stored. Preserved. She chose her next word with care. A gift, possibly. Or a record. Or both. She closed her notebook. I know that's a significant claim. I want to be honest that it's a reading, not a confirmed translation. But I feel confident enough in the structure to say it out loud. Nobody argued with her. Part of that was because she had already proven herself in the past 12 hours. Part of it was because the alternative, that this enormous, ancient, patient vessel was something threatening, was sitting right next to the alternative she had just offered, and the one she had just offered felt more coherent. More consistent with the behavior of something that sent signals for 9 years without getting an answer and then responded calmly and immediately when it finally did. Leonard spoke up from his station. If it's automated, no crew, then who's making the decision to respond? Who decided to open up and transmit all of this? Good question, Nora said. I think it's running on some kind of guidance system. Not a simple computer, something more sophisticated. Something capable of recognizing a response to its signal and adjusting its behavior accordingly. She thought about it for a moment. Something that was built to wait, and to respond when the right moment came. How long has it been waiting? Ethan asked. Nora looked at him. Based on the age markers in the transmission, and again, this is an estimate, I think the ship has been traveling for somewhere between 300 and 500 years. The number landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. 300 years. Maybe 500. It had been moving through the dark, slow and silent and completely alone, since before the first human settlements had left the home system. Before the first generation ships. Before any human being had stood on any world other than Earth and looked up at the stars. It had been out there the whole time. Dana was looking at the viewport. The black ship was there, barely visible, a deeper darkness, a missing section of stars. She thought about what it would take to build something like that. The knowledge. The patience. The will to send something out into the universe and trust that eventually, after centuries, it would find what it was looking for. She thought about the civilization that had made it. Are they still out there? She asked. The ones who built it. Nora was quiet for a moment. The second layer of the transmission, the part about the builders, uses a grammatical structure I'm interpreting as past tense. They are not described as current. They are described as previous. She paused. They left, is my best reading. They went somewhere. They are not gone, in the sense of being destroyed. But they are not here. Not in this part of space. She looked at the viewport. They sent this ahead of them, or behind them, depending on how you look at it. A message for whoever came next. Novak stood in the center of his bridge and looked at his crew, Dana at tactical, Leonard at sensors, Ethan at communications, Roy who had come back upstairs again and was standing quietly near the door, and Nora with her notebook and her screens full of light. He looked at the black ship. Something that had been traveling for 300 to 500 years had finally found someone willing to listen to it. Not by accident. Not by luck. Because one person had found a 9-year-old signal in a forgotten file and brought it to someone who knew what it meant. Because a team of tired, committed, unremarkable people on a small ship had chosen to respond instead of wait. He did not say any of that out loud. It felt too large to say out loud. Keep working, he told Nora. I want to know what it's carrying. She was already turned back to her console before he finished the sentence, #the black ship, side story what's the mission? Nora worked for another 3 hours before she had something solid enough to bring to the full team. In that time she drank 2 cups of coffee, filled 11 more pages in her notebook, and did not speak except to ask Ethan for specific files or to quietly correct herself when she realized she had misread a pattern and needed to start a section over. Ethan watched her work the way you watch someone solve a puzzle you cannot quite see the shape of, with admiration and a certain helplessness, aware that the best thing you can do is stay out of the way and be ready when something is needed. At one point Leonard came over and stood behind them both for a while, looking at the screens with his arms folded. He didn't say anything. He just looked, and then went back to his station, which was Leonard's way of paying attention to something important. Roy had brought sandwiches up from the galley at some point. Nobody remembered when. They appeared on the edge of the console and people ate them when they remembered to, or didn't. Commander Novak had spent the time moving between his office and the bridge, reading reports from the rest of the ship and drafting preliminary contact logs for UEN command. He was careful about what he wrote. He used precise language and avoided conclusions he could not yet support. He wrote what they had observed, what they had received, and what they had done. He did not yet write what he believed it meant. That part was still being figured out. Dana had built a detailed physical survey of the black ship from every passive reading she had collected over the past several hours. It was not complete, most of what she had was still absence, still the shape of a thing defined by what it wasn't doing rather than what it was, but the picture had enough form now to be useful. The vessel's movement had stopped entirely since the transmission began, which suggested that whatever was guiding it had decided that arriving at the Alderman colony was no longer the immediate priority. It was here. It had found someone. That was enough. When Nora finally turned around from her console and addressed the room, the bridge felt smaller and more important than it usually did, the way rooms do when the people in them are about to hear something that will not be forgettable. I have a working read, she said. Not complete. There are significant sections I cannot get through yet, and some of what I've translated may shift as I understand more of the underlying framework. But the core of it is stable enough that I'm comfortable sharing it. She set her notebook down on the edge of the console and looked at the people around her. The builders called themselves something that doesn't translate cleanly into any word we have. The closest I can get is something like the first walkers, or maybe the ones who went ahead. The name implies motion, implies precedence. They thought of themselves as travelers, not settlers. They did not build places to stay. They built things to carry. She paused. They were in this region of space for a very long time. Thousands of years, by the scale markers in the transmission. And during that time they encountered many other species, some very early in their development, some older, some roughly equivalent to where they were. What happened to those species? Dana asked. Some grew. Some did not. The transmission does not describe how or why, it's not a history in that sense. It's more like a letter than a textbook. Nora looked at her notebook. At some point, the builders made a decision to leave. To go further. To move into a part of the universe that the transmission describes in terms I can't fully read yet, something beyond the region we know, further than our current exploration reach. And before they left, they made these ships. She turned the notebook so that the page faced them, though most of them could not read her handwriting. Not one ship. Many. They sent them in different directions, into different regions of space, with instructions to travel and to look. To find species that had reached a certain point of development. And when they found one, to offer them what the builders had left behind. She closed the notebook. Knowledge. A record of everything the builders had learned over thousands of years. Information about the other species they had encountered. Observations about the universe, about physics, about biology, about things we probably don't have the right words for yet. All of it stored inside the ship and offered freely to anyone who was ready to receive it. The room was silent for a long moment. Ethan was the first to speak. How do they know when a species is ready? That's the part one find most interesting, Nora said, and for the first time since the contact began, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was genuine. The threshold is not technological. It's not about how far you can travel or what weapons you've built or how much energy you can produce. The threshold is simpler than that. She looked at Ethan. You have to answer back. That's it. The ship sends a signal, and the species has to be capable of receiving it, recognizing it as a signal, and responding to it in kind. That's the test. Not intelligence exactly. Not power. Just willingness. The willingness to try to understand something you've never seen before. Nobody said anything for a moment. Dana looked at the viewport. At the black shape out there in the corridor, patient and still, carrying 5 centuries of accumulated knowledge from a civilization that had thought far enough ahead to pack it up and send it forward before they left. They weren't just sending information, she said slowly. They were sending a hand. Like reaching back and offering someone a hand who's still climbing. Yes, Nora said. I think that's exactly right. Novak had been standing near the back of the bridge, listening. He walked forward now and stood at the center of the room, looking at the forward viewport the way he had been looking at it all day. The black ship was there, just barely visible, the stars around its edges unchanged. He pulled out his communicator. I'm going to contact UEN Command, he said. I'm going to tell them we need a full xenological team, linguists, historians, physicists, biologists, specialists from every field we can pull together. I'm going to request a diplomatic charter so that whatever formal relationship we build with this vessel is done properly and with the right people involved. And I'm going to recommend that the Alderman colony be informed, carefully, in terms that are clear and calm, that their neighborhood just changed. He looked at Nora. And Doctor, you keep talking to it. Whatever it still has to say, I want to hear every word of it. Nora nodded and turned back to her console. Roy cleared his throat. He was standing near the door, large and steady, as he had been most of the day. So what's the actual mission now? He asked. I mean, what do we call this? What are we doing here? Novak looked at him. He thought about the question. He thought about the fact that they had come out here to assess a threat to 32,000 people, and had found something that had been trying for 9 years to offer a gift. He thought about the Cassidy and its crew, who still had not been found, and whose fate was a question that still needed answering. He thought about the builders, those ancient, patient, forward-thinking travelers who had trusted that eventually, in some corridor of space, something would come along that was willing to say hello back. He thought about the fact that the thing which had done it was this ship. His ship. These people. Not a fleet, not a diplomatic envoy, not a carefully planned first contact mission with years of preparation behind it. Just 6 tired people and a 41-person crew on a light reconnaissance vessel, doing their jobs in the dark and paying attention. The mission is what it's always been, Novak said. We go out into the dark and we find out what's there. And then we make sure the people back home know about it. He paused. We just didn't expect the dark to find us first. He raised the communicator and began his report. Outside, in the Kepler 7 corridor, the black ship floated in the silence of open space. It was not moving anymore. It had no reason to move anymore. It had traveled 3 centuries, or 4, or 5, through the long dark between the stars, sending out its quiet signal and waiting, and then one day a small and unremarkable vessel had answered it in a language it recognized. And that was enough. Inside the Steadfast, Dr. Nora Ellison pulled up the next layer of the transmission and started to read. Ethan Cruz sat beside her with his stylus ready. Leonard Tate logged the incoming data with the same careful precision he brought to everything. Dana Holloway ran her scans and documented what she found. Roy Gaines stood near the door and watched over all of it in his quiet, steady way. And Commander Carl Novak spoke into his communicator in a clear, even voice and told UEN Command that humanity had just received a message that was 500 years in transit, and that it was time to start writing a reply. Something that had been waiting a very long time had finally arrived. And for the first time in that corridor, it was not alone.